Daf Yomi, Tractate, Zevachim, page 76. A, top of the page, with the words Zechulan, Rishayin Kohanim, Lishnos Bachilas, Nechot Suluin, Shilokin Umivishalin, Nases Esachan Tashle Chulin, Tashle Truma. This fly is annoying. V'tav shalei trumo, or v'tav le trumo, divrei Rabbi Shmuel, amar lei, hanach le trumas tavlin derabanan. And with regard to all of the offerings that are eaten, the priests are permitted to alter the manner of their consumption and eat them as they choose. Therefore, the priests are permitted to eat them roasted, boiled, or cooked. Okay? And they are likewise permitted to place non-sacred spices or truma spices in the cooking pot. This is the statement of Rabbi Ishmael. This indicates that it is permitted to spice offerings with truma spices ab initio, despite the fact that this reduces the time available to eat the truma. Rava said to Abaya, set aside the halacha of truma of spices, as this truma applies by rabbinic law, not by Torah law. Eishvei, ein loichin truma kesef maasel, yipnei shemai bachilose. Abaya raised an objection to Rabbah from a Mishnah in Maser Sheni 3:2. One may not purchase truma with the second tithe money because he thereby limits the circumstances for the eating of the truma. Truma may be eaten in any place and even by an acute mourner, meaning one whose relative died that same day and has not yet been buried, whereas the second tithe in food purchased with second tithe money must be eaten in Jerusalem and is prohibited to an acute mourner. And Rabbi Shimon permits one to purchase truma with second tithe money. This indicates that Rabbi Shimon allows one to bring truma to the status of unfitness. Rabbah was silent in response to his statement and did not answer Abaye. He asked the comment of Yosef, Amar le, Amaylo, Tozve, Meha, En Mavashlin, Yirak Shel Shviz, Beshemen Shel Trumo, ושלא יביאו קדושים לבייס הפסול ברבי שמעון מתיר. When Abai came before Yosef and told him of his discussion with Rabbah, Rabbi Yosef said to him, why didn't you raise an objection to Rabbah from this Mishnah? And should we eat 8:7? One may not cook vegetables of the sabbatical year in truma oil, so that one does not bring consecrated food, truma, to the status of unfitness, as the truma oil would have to be eaten before the time of the removal of the sabbatical year produce. Rabbi Shimon permits one to cook in this manner. Evidently, Rabbi Shimon allows one to bring truma to the status of unfitness ab initio. Amalei Abaye, v'lav mi ois v'isei men tavlin. V'amar li, ha'adach truma tavlin derabanan. Hachanami tumas yerek derabanan. Ihachi ibcha mi boile. V'misni yarak shel truma shemen shel shviz. Abai said to Rav Yosef, and didn't I raise an objection to Rabbah from that Mishnah discussing the halacha of truma spices? And he said to me, disregard the halacha of truma spices, as this truma applies by rabbinic law. Here too, with regard to vegetables of the Sabbatic year, he could likewise say that this truma oil is not olive oil, but oil that is truma vegetables, which applies by rabbinic law. Rabbi Yosef replied, if so, that this Mishnah is referring to vegetable oil of truma, it should teach the opposite case, that one may not cook vegetables in truma oil, of truma and oil of the sabbatical year. Since the Tana specifies truma oil, he must certainly be speaking of truma by Torah law, meaning olive oil. Ilav mi'os vise mimas nisin dimatir Rabbi Shimon ve'amali dida v'chanami te'iyaref. And Abaye then said to Rabbi Yosef, and I didn't raise an objection to Rabbah from the Mishnah in which Rabbi Shimon permits one to bring sacrificial animals to the status of unfitness. And Rabbah said to me that Rabbi Shimon's ruling applies only after the fact, when the guilt offering and peace offering have become intermingled. Here too, he would say that this ruling is after the fact, that when truma oil and the vegetables of the sabbatical year have become intermingled, one may then cook them together, but he does not permit one to cook them ab initio. The Gemara asks, if this halacha is referring to a case where the foods have already become intermingled, what is the reason of the rabbis for prohibiting one to cook them together? The Gemara answers, this is just as it is in the case of the Mishnah with regard to a guilt offering and peace offering that become intermingled, that even after the offerings are intermingled, one may not bring the flesh of the peace offering to the status of unfitness. Midami hacha asham isle takanta bereia. Ha lesta takanta bereia. The Gemara raises the difficulty. Are these two cases comparable? There, with regard to the offerings, the situation has a remedy by having the offerings grazed until they develop a blemish, at which point the owner brings each offering of each type with the monetary value of a higher quality animal. By contrast, in this case of truma oil mixed with vegetables of the sabbatical year, the situation has no remedy similar to that of having the offerings grazed, and therefore, if the rabbis permitted the mixture, the truma would go to waste. If one wishes to compare this case of oil and vegetables to an intermingling of sacrificial animals, this is comparable only to the other halacha of the Mishnah, which addresses a piece of the flesh of an offering of the most sacred order that was intermingled with pieces of flesh of offerings of lesser sanctity. Here the rabbis concede that since there is no remedy for the intermingled pieces, the halacha is that they both must be eaten in accordance with the halacha of the more stringent among them, but they are not prohibited. Ravina objects to this comparison. Are these cases comparable? In the case of the piece of sacrificial flesh that is intermingled with the other pieces, it has no remedy at all, whereas this case of truma oil has a remedy through squeezing the oil from the vegetables. If so, this case of vegetables is in fact comparable to that of an intermingling of a guilt offering and peace offering, which also have a means of remedy, and for this reason the rabbis prohibited the mixture. Rav Yosef hechi nischot tuva kamafsid b'shviz nischot purta sof sof I orove The Gemara asks, and how would Rav Yosef respond to the claim that the rabbis prohibit this mixture after the fact because there's a remedy available through squeezing it? The Gemara explains that Rav Yosef will respond that squeezing it is not in fact a remedy, as how can one squeeze it? If one squeezes the vegetables a lot, he thereby causes a loss of sabbatical year produce. If one squeezes the vegetables a little, ultimately the truma oil and vegetables of the sabbatical year will be intermingled, as this squeezing will be ineffective. If so, Rav Yosef's contention that in this case the rabbis would not have prohibited cooking vegetables of the sabbatical year in truma oil remains valid. Consequently, this must be referring to a case where the vegetables and oil have not yet become mixed, which means that this case does not prove that Rabbi Shimon permits one to bring sacrificial animals to the status of unfitness ab initio, not only after the fact, as claimed by Rabbah. Eisvei Rabbi Shimon Omer Nimachas Be'viah Shomim V'lo Yimoi V'omer Im Shemitzoiro Harei Ze Ashamoi V'Ze Lugoi. Rav Yosef raised an objection to the opinion of Rabbah from the Bright and Tosefta Nazir 6:1. How should one whose status as a confirmed leper has not been determined, bring his guilt offering a log of oil on the 8th day of his purification? Rabbi Shimon says on the following day, after his 7 days of purification, he brings his guilt offering and his log of oil with it, and says the following stipulation: if this offering is one of a leper, meaning if I'm a confirmed leper, this is his, meaning my guilt offering, and that is his log of oil. Okay, turning to 76b, V'im Lav, just to continue the idea. V'im Lav, and if I'm not a leper, Ashim Zeh Shal Shamim Yidavim, V'asad Ashim Toyin Shchita B'Tavim, Matan Bahonos, V'smicha U'Nesachim, U'Tenufa Chazak B'Shav. And if he is not a leper, this animal that is brought for a guilt offering shall be a voluntary peace offering, because their sacrificial rights are equivalent. And that uncertain guilt offering requires slaughter in the north of the temple as a guilt offering, and placement of the blood on the right thumb and the big toe and the right ear of the leper, as described in Leviticus 14:14. And it requires placing hands on the head of the animal and the accompanying of wine libations and waving of the breast and thigh like a peace offering. Okay, just to finish the idea. And lastly, and lastly, if it is eaten by males of the priesthood on the day of the sacrifice and the following night, in the temple courtyard, like a guilt offering, not for 2 days and 1 night, in the manner of a peace offering. This indicates that Rabbi Shimon permits one to bring sacrificial animals to the status of unfitness, even ab initio, not only when the animals became intermingled. The Gemara answers that the remedy of a man is different from the case discussed by Rabbah. Since this person has no way of purifying himself from his leprosy other than by bringing the offering, the concern of reducing the time available for its consumption is disregarded. We'll stop here and continue with side B after the break.